People who have traveled to China. What is your what the China story? I was traveling with a group in China right before the Beijing Olympics. I'm a 6-foot tall black dude, and according to our tour guide, black people are incredibly rare to see in China. This is relevant for the story. So on the day that we were going to see the Great Wall, I just happened to be wearing a football jersey, American football, I brought with me. Apparently, being relatively tall, black, and wearing sports apparel is enough for some Chinese people to think that you're a professional athlete. We get to the Great Wall and start walking around. It's much steeper than you would think, and some parts are pretty difficult to walk. But I'm quickly swarmed by tons of Chinese people who want to take a picture with me. I'm normally very reserved and quite the introvert, but as the crowd around me started to grow, I just decided to go with it. So I smiled, took pictures, and signed autographs to my heart's content. That is until I was asked to leave because the group around me was getting so large it was blocking the entire span of the wall and people couldn't get past. A similar thing happened a few weeks later when I was flying to Shanghai and was walking through the airport wearing sunglasses and a backpack, and a few people thought it was Kanye West. I can imagine the people who took photos with this guy and bragging they saw Kanye. That would have been a funny conversation. Story 2. In middle school, my school had an exchange program with a school in China where students from my school would go to the Chinese school to experience their culture, etc. for a week and vice versa. All the students would stay in a host's family's house, not a hotel. Originally, I didn't sign up for the program, but when my Chinese teacher said that one Chinese student didn't have a host family, I thought it would be interesting and maybe even fun if I hosted a Chinese student for a week, so I accepted. On the day that all the Chinese students arrived at our school to be acquainted with their host families, and I met the Chinese student coming to live with me, I could already tell something was off about him. He didn't shake my hand, greet me, or anything, just looked at me and said nothing. I'm half Taiwanese, half American, but I look very Western, which might have been a bit of a surprise to this kid, who I later learned was the son of a government official or something along the lines of that. The Chinese exchange student that we'll call Shane was the most spoiled kid I've ever met. Before eating, he demanded that we give him small dishes and made a mini version of the meal for him to taste test. If he didn't like it, he would demand something else. He would delicately pick out the ingredients and sniff them before eating them, and usually this process would take about 10 minutes. Another funny trait Shane would have is that he would treat us, the host family, as the servants he presumably had back in China. He would never help to clean up. He would leave his shit all over the place for us to tidy and generally make a mess wherever he went. One time he came back from messing around in our backyard for some reason and tracked dog poop all over the house. When we found out, we freaked out and started trying to clean it up. Shane, when questioned about how he had poop all over his shoes and spread it all over the floor, claimed that we shouldn't worry because his shoes aren't that dirty. On the last day of the exchange program, the school had an organized activity where all the Chinese students and host families would go to a shopping mall before they went back to China. When Shane was walking around, he just seemed kind of floppy. His whole body just seemed uncoordinated and like it was made of Play-Doh. It seemed like he had servants to move him around every day so he never learned to walk. He would ask us to pay for all the souvenirs, and after we bought them, he ended up not even wanting half of it because it was made in Japan. And here's the kicker. He didn't say thank you once. For a whole week of being treated like a king, he just dismissed us after serving him. When we said goodbye for the final time, he just grunted in dismissal and left. Everyone's asking why I didn't slap him or just ignore his requests, but middle school me allowed it because chances were he would blibe to the teacher that we were neglecting him, and I really didn't need to be on bad terms with my Chinese teacher. She was scary as f***. Also, another fun thing he did was never close the door when he was going to pee so everyone could see or hear his business. Never again. Story 3. This is going to get buried, but oh well, someone might enjoy it. So I've lived in China for 13 years. Mine would have been when we had to give up our home to a Chinese crime lord. We were renting a home in Shanghai. It was worth about $15 million, not that we could ever buy it, but rent wasn't too bad. Anyways, our landlady was the great and ambitious woman who had built herself up as a pretty successful landowner in China. Unfortunately, as per Chinese tradition, she had to be married and her husband was an absolute deadbeat. He spent all his time gambling illegally. He eventually racked up a debt of over 10 million RMB, over 1 million USD, and borrowed money from the Chinese mob to pay it off. A smart move in the mob's part because they were probably the ones running the gambling in the first place and knew this guy owned a lot of property through his wife. Anyways, one day out of the blue, our landlord tells us, with some muscle behind her, probably to prompt her rather than scare us as she looked pretty disheveled, that we have 24 hours to move. The mob showed up demanding their money, and when she didn't have it, agreed to take the house instead. A pretty good profit for them, if you ask me. We talked to the mob guys and explained that we didn't have anything to do with this and asked if we could have more time. They were pretty nice about it and understood, and after calling what must have been their HQ, they agreed to give us 4 days. The next day, the mob boss showed up to look around our house to see what he had acquired. He was a tall but average-looking Chinese man in his 40s to mid-50s wearing a long brown leather coat. He had 4 shorter but far more muscular armed bodyguards who were dressed entirely in black, and his wife was there wearing a red dress. She was insanely beautiful. A solid 10, uniquely tall for an Asian woman as well. He was very friendly and shook all our hands, apologizing for inconveniencing us. He was the only one that spoke. His bodyguards just watched us all very carefully, and his wife smiled but didn't comment. It was pretty surreal. He looked so normal, but definitely had a pretty intimidating aura about him, mostly in the way he walked and talked, like he literally owned the place. Well, actually, at this point, he did. Anyway, he liked the house, thanked us in nearly perfect English for giving him a tour and our hospitality, and left. 3 days later, we had moved out. We kept in touch with our landlady, but her husband disappeared. It was pretty heavily implied that he had gone into hiding but been caught and disposed of, so that was interesting. I have a ton of stories from China, but that was one of the more memorable ones. Story 4. I traveled to China last year with my partner, who was teaching in Beijing. We decided we wanted to ride camels in the Gobi Desert because of reasons. Getting to Mongolia was way too expensive and a hassle for our time schedule, so we ended up taking an overnight train to Zhangwei, which is just up against the desert. Lonely Planet recommended one guy, Billy, freaking Billy, in the guidebook for this camel excursion. So we hired Billy, he drives us out to this random place, and a local farmer walks up with 3 camels for our overnight trek into the desert. Billy hands the farmer some cash. Not nearly enough, we think. And we get on the camels and go with this guy who speaks no English and probably speaks a dialect of Mandarin. Anyway, off we go. It's hot. It's full of dunes. It's cool. Billy has warned us that dinner will be simple. Backcountry fare. Billy's not with us, by the way. Freaking Billy. No problem. We backpack a lot. We can dig it. We stop for camp and the guy builds a fire and puts white rice in a pan. We watch, waiting for the salt, the pepper, the veggies, the something. But nope. We got served plain white rice for dinner. And some apples that tasted like soap. And this weird pickled thing that tasted like goodness knows. We're not picky eaters. We are adventurous eaters, but this was the worst. We also got these weird processed meat sticks that looked, smelled, and I guess tasted like dog food. Freaking Billy had given us beer though, and that probably had more nutritional value than the white rice, so we drank it. The next day we had ramen for breakfast. Would have been better for all the meals, and trekked back to town. I swear Billy was keeping his overhead like zero. He was profiting off of being a Chinese guy who spoke English and who somehow got Lonely Planet, and don't even get me started on those guys and their terrible advice in China, to list him in his book. I think he paid the farmer a pinch of the $300 or so we paid him. We tipped the farmer generously before Billy picked us up, and Billy probably paid next to nothing for the rice. So that's the story of how we got ripped off by Billy in China. But on that same trip, when we were hanging out in Zhangwei one evening, as the only Westerners, and an interracial couple at that, we were sitting having dinner. And a group of women out there for a girls' night paid for our dinner and insisted on taking us to karaoke. They spoke no English and got a young kid who spoke English to ask us. We played Chinese drinking games, sang in English while they sang in Mandarin, and had the best time. China can be what the in all the worst and best ways. Freaking Billy! Well, at least there was karaoke. I'm pretty sure that you're vibing with the stories just like this couple hates Billy. Why don't you show some love by hitting the like button and subscribe to my channel? You'll never know. I might have a video of me singing karaoke in future videos. Story 5. I've lived in China off and on for 4 years and have tons of stories. I dredged up this email I wrote home for the last time. It's long but gives a good impression. The pollution is crazy. For 2 days last week, it was so thick it stung the eyes. You know, if you ride a bicycle without glasses, bugs and little bits of dirt will get in your eye? It was like that, except it was little pollution nuggets instead of bugs. And it happened while walking at a slow pace. On most days, the air looks thick and gray, almost like a thunderstorm, but not that clear, beautiful silver gray of rain clouds. More, well, dirty. Last night, we were accosted by dino roaches. I was reading my book in bed and decided to get up for a snack. As I was eating with a computer, I saw a large roach walk out of the hallway and under the couch, across the room, under the chair, outside to the porch and back inside again towards the hall. That was when I smashed him to smithereens. I tried to go to sleep after that, but I couldn't lay in bed without imagining cockroaches climbing on us as we slept. So I got up again. That was the wrong thing to do. Sitting in the living room again, suddenly we heard a smack on the floor and turned around to see a dino roach crawling around. I killed it, but another flew in the window and landed on the door. It seemed like someone was fumigating their apartment and they were moving into ours. After all of that excitement, I once again tried to sleep, but couldn't after I heard scurrying in the bedroom. As soon as I would move my book light, it would stop, then slowly start again. We've put out those little roach motels, but the problem is that the roaches are too big to get into them. Aside from the roaches, we have had some bugs befriend us. We didn't realize that bulk food wasn't safe as we always try to buy bulk at home. We didn't notice anything strange in our first round of bulk food, but the second time we bought popcorn, we discovered weevils. We have thrown out the popcorn and the beans that were saturated with them, but we kept the rice. After picking through it, there's still an occasional black spot in our food. Since we've gone here, we've been sick. All of us. A lot. We just hit our 5-month mark the other day, and I've been sick with a cold 3 times, had a crazy mystery dizzy illness for about 2 weeks, and I'm just getting over some sort of week-long tummy bug. Brandon had 2 colds, bronchitis, and the flu. Jude has had 3 colds as well. We generally don't go to the doctor when sick. If you're wondering why we don't go to the doctor, let me try to explain. Whenever one of us gets sick, someone says, Oh yeah, the weather isn't great right now. They said that in January in the cold with no heat, they said that in March and April in moderate weather, and they said that in May when it was getting into the 90s. No one will acknowledge that a cold is caused by a virus. I hate to say that my good friend Wing's idea of what causes a cold doesn't inspire me to go to her doctor's. When her daughter caught a cold, Wing told me it was from swimming. I talked to her about it and told her it was impossible to get a cold from swimming, but her logic was infallible. If you go swimming and start coughing later that night, it has to be from swimming. One of the other reasons we don't like the doctors here is because they're overly fond of using IVs. Anytime you go to a hospital, they have a huge area dedicated to people sitting around in plastic lawn chairs with IV bags hooked up above them. For the longest time, I had no idea what was in them. Wing would just say it was medicine. Recently, I talked to one of the foreigners we know and had been sick for quite some time. He said he went in for the IV and they gave him an entire bottle of Robitussin through it. The ugly before we came here, Wing told me the school was in a park. I assumed that there were open fields and trees and maybe a pond or two. What she actually meant, though, was an amusement park. We were utterly shocked to arrive here and see upside-down twirly rides everywhere, mostly with rusted parts and terribly odd shabby paint. I judged from the state of the rides that the park wasn't in operation. A few days per week, the park is overrun with primary and middle school students. While this isn't bad in itself, there is an awful outcome on the days they visit. Merchants come and set up ring toss games for just a few yuan, and the kids get to toss a ring and try to land in a cage with a baby chicken or duck in it. That means that every time the park is open, there are hundreds of school kids walking about, carrying their newly won baby birds in plastic bags, sometimes in 90-degree weather. Some have enough extra money to buy a small cage, and some have enough to buy food, but not most. Knowing that 99% of those birds are going to die as it is bad enough, but sometimes the kids leave behind a dead bird on the playground, or a stepped-on one in the street. Things were kicked up a notch recently on my afternoon stroll to the playground with my class. I was walking with the kids and my assistant and I heard peeping from a trash can. I pulled out the bag and searched around for the peeps, finding about 20 chicks. I opened it up and tried to save the 6 or so that were still moving, but they all died. The next week, walking to the playground, I heard chirping again from the trash can and from the bushes. These at least turned out to be single cases of discarded birds, and one of my students took them home to raise. Recently, a large supermarket opened up on the ground floor of our apartment complex. Before we moved here, Wing told me how much I would love it as it was very similar to Hong Kong. This was true for a while, as this is a very affluent area so people don't stare at us as much. A fair number of people have either studied or lived abroad or had experience with foreigners. The community also has about 100 workers sweeping and scrubbing the streets daily. At first, I just thought people didn't litter as much here. On me. So it's cleaner than your average Chinese city. When we first got here, we got to know the cleaning ladies. They loved Jude, and knew people who lived near us. But as soon as the store below us opened up, we were bombarded with strangers and trash. The workers take their breaks in front of their door to our building, and whole lines of them will stare daggers at us when we walk out. To a villager, our white skin is the equivalent of someone hopping out of their Rolls or Benz, Rolex glittering. Every morning, the trash from the restaurants and the supermarket are dumped right where we walk out. So rotting fish and garbage is one of the first smells to greet us, and apparently, someone couldn't wait to find a toilet because there are 2 large deposits in the stairwell up to the 2nd floor, which we were forced to walk daily. Not sure why the cleaning ladies never got around to cleaning that up. One of the last things in the ugly category is the traffic. Yes, I knew that people here didn't obey traffic laws and that crossing the street here inspired the game of Frogger, but it has taken on a whole new dimension with Jude, and in our neighborhood in particular. For 1/3 of the walk to school, we walk on a paved pedestrian street between 2 rows of shops, and it is blocked off to vehicles. This, of course, does not stop a constant stream of motorcyclists and scooters that want to take a shortcut. After we leave the pedestrian area, all bets are off. Between us and the school is a roundabout similar in size to the one at 39th and Glisson in Portland. But it has no stop signs, no stoplights, only about 15 feet of sidewalk on one portion, and an extra lane. The drivers here do not use blinkers, and they constantly turn right from the center lane, giving no warning and cutting off the other 2 lanes of traffic. Sometimes people use the outer lane as a parking lot, stopping without warning and causing backups. This leaves us making our way through this mess 4 times a day, whipping our head around as fast as possible, attempting to not be hit. Cars do not slow down or stop because you're carrying a baby. If you want to cross the street, you weave between cars or you'll be there till dusk waiting. Story 6. Not me, but my brother. He was invited to a wedding out in rural China and due to his white skin became more important than the bride. He literally lived a rural life. Constant photos because people not from main cities literally have never seen white people before. My brother spoke only English at the time, so communication was merely charades. But there is one story that is my absolute favorite. Due to being out in rural China, if you want a shower, you have to go to the public showers. First time he went, it was just the guys from the Chinese family he was staying with. Next time, it was essentially every male who lived nearby. They were fascinated. My brother is usually super shy, but he figured he was in the middle of nowhere, so he was cool with all these Chinese males checking him out. But that's not the best part. Oh no, not yet. If anyone has seen the Conan video where he and Steven Yeun go to a Korean bathhouse, you would be aware of how great these bathhouses can be. Well, there was a concrete slab in the middle of the shower, which the owner started getting wet and scrubbing. The brother ignored it, too busy being side-eyed by Asian men, but then the owner grunted at him and started pointing at the slab, using limited communication to tell him to get on the slab. So my brother, as the day he was born, the only white guy for miles, usually so shy and self-conscious, climbed on and proceeded to be scrubbed by some old Chinese man, while a large audience watched in awe. Story 7. Oh boy, I hope I'm not too late. I'm Chinese and lived in China for 3 years. This is my time to shine. One time I went to an alligator theme park. There were lots of exhibits showing different kinds of crocodiles, alligators, caimans, etc. They reserved a lot of alligators. How do you get rid of extra alligators? On the way out, we passed by a restaurant and they were making alligator dumplings. I kid you not. They had a huge window where you could look in and see the cooks preparing the alligator meat. I looked in and saw giant severed alligator heads lying on the counter. No biggie. A mother letting her baby take a dump in public in the middle of an IKEA. This isn't exactly abnormal. Street food. Vendors sold scorpion skewers in a Beijing tourist hotspot. The scorpions were pretty small and tied to the skewers and still alive. You pointed to a skewer you wanted and the vendor would fry them right in front of you. The same stall also sold pupae skewers, seahorse on a stick and starfish on a stick. I've eaten so much weird in China. The freaking Chengdu Panda Reserve and how much unnecessary care goes into maintaining their pandas. The reserve is right in the middle of their natural habitat, and yet they have to bring the pandas in every afternoon because they're afraid the pandas would get heat stroke. If you're really pale-skinned or have really blonde hair, a lot of people will go up to you and ask to take photographs. I knew an American kid who charged people 5 yuan to take a photo with his sister who had bright ginger hair. People paid him. Oh yeah. And a few years ago when I was living in Shanghai, the river that bisects the city was suddenly filled with bloated pig corpses floating down the river. Apparently some farmers upstream had lost a bunch of pigs to some weird disease, so they did the logical thing and dumped them in the river. Despite all the weirdness, I love living in China. I've got a ton more stories if anyone is interested. Dumplings, anyone? I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. People who visited the US. What made you go, what the f***, America? You won't believe story 4 is normal. See you in that video.